on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Glad you're here. Glad you stopped by. If you're new to the channel, thank you for visiting. Hit the subscribe button right now. A lot of good stuff coming up in the next several weeks and several months. So stay tuned. You don't want to miss it. Got an interesting video today. I think it's interesting because I'm kind of a nerd. Hopefully you find it interesting as well. I want to talk a little bit about exhaust systems and exhaust theory. I want to talk a little bit about what my plans are for the Q50 because we haven't really dug into that much, and how that relates to the exhaust setup. And also, I got some good news. Good news because we're getting the car tuned. It is officially scheduled with Soho Motorsports in Charlotte. I'll be going there. It is a little bit of a wait. I have to wait until March 4th. It's the first Monday in March. A couple reasons though, and I'm happy about that. It is a little bit of a wait, but it gives me time to wrap up the exhaust system that I'm working on, and give me time to get that installed and hopefully dialed in. And also, my parents are actually coming down to visit, to stay for a few days from Minnesota. And my dad gets a kick out of that kind of stuff, so I thought it'd be good to take him along. He's kind of a car guy from way back. If you saw my other video, he used to have an Oldsmobile 442 in 1969, pretty sharp. He's into motorcycles as well, so he likes kind of hanging out in the garage and tinkering and things, so I think he'll have a good time seeing the car on the dyno. So we'll make a little day trip out of it for him and myself. And obviously, we will film as much as we possibly can. I've heard the guys at Soho are pretty good dudes, and just talking with a couple of them over the last couple of months, I get that vibe as well, so I'm pretty excited about it. Now, I mentioned I am a nerd, and I'm a nerd when it comes to analyzing things and finding trends and putting numbers together and finding patterns and figuring things out. I mentioned it a little bit when we talked about tires in a previous video. I love tire theory and traction and figuring out what setup of wheels and tires, or tires specifically, work for specific cars and type of driving situations and things like that. I like to really analyze things and not kind of just go with the flow like some folks like to do. The same goes for exhaust. There's a lot of theory behind exhaust systems, and that's really what I want to dig in today. I also looked at a bunch of videos online on YouTube today with some G37s and a couple of Q50s I was able to find, and pulled some numbers that they were able to get on the dyno with a tune, and included their modifications, so we can compare modifications and the results that they were able to achieve. So we'll look a little bit closer at those numbers as well, so stick around toward the end of the video for that. It seems to be kind of a mentality that bigger is better, both for tires and for exhaust. Guys say, I want the widest, fattest tire on the back of the car, when really it might not be necessary, because the car doesn't actually make enough horsepower to make it necessary. So there's a similar mentality to exhaust systems. Well, everyone seems to upgrade, and all the aftermarket exhaust manufacturers seem to make their upgraded system 2.5 inch diameter pipe. They sound really nice, but the reality is that a lot of cars, especially if you're just doing some bolt-on modifications, don't need a 2.5 inch diameter exhaust. It's just not necessary, and that's really specifically what I want to talk about today, and how that relates to what I'm doing with this car. So maybe we should start there. I've always been into drag racing, straight line racing, right? High speed, high RPM, 0 to 60 times, 60 foot times, quarter mile times. And I've never really set up a car to handle really well or drive in the mountains. And after moving to the East Coast, and particularly the upstate of South Carolina, I've really fell in love with driving in the mountains, especially the Blue Ridge Parkway, or I haven't made a Tail of the Dragon yet, but that's definitely on my list to do, hopefully for 2019. But I just kind of love the feel of, taking the car through those twisty roads and accelerating out of corners and braking into the hairpin turns. It's fun. It's really exciting. Maybe it's an age thing. I don't know. But that's kind of how I want to set this car up going forward. So that has a lot to do with what we're going to do with the exhaust, because automatically when people start to modify cars, it seems like the air intake system and the exhaust system, those are the first two things that people touch. Now let's assume that the intake system is done, the car's bringing in as much air as it can, you know, with maybe some can-in drop-in filters or an intake. Again, if you're new to the channel, we talk a lot about the Q50 3.7 liter platform. So that if you're following along, that's what I'm discussing. But you know, let's assume that you have drop-in filters and the Z1 silicone intake tubes. That's what I have. That's what we'll talk about. So we're not worried about the front part. We're not worried about the air intake. We're talking about exhaust. So there's two elements that you need present in your exhaust system to get the most out of it, right? And those two things are flow and velocity. And there has to be a good relationship between the two to make things happen, okay? I'm gonna try to illustrate this for you as best I can. So how do we get good flow? We eliminate restrictions. So we've gotten rid of the catalytic converters, we've gotten rid of the muffler, and we might have even increased the diameter of our exhaust system with a new setup, right? To 2.5 inch, let's say. So we went from the 2-inch stock exhaust or 2.25 inch to 2.5. So the diameter of our pipe is significantly larger all the way through the system. So we should have really good flow, right? Right. But is that beneficial? We'll talk about it. And what is velocity? Velocity is just what you might think. It's how efficiently or how quickly that exhaust is flowing through your system. So the important thing is that, like I said, that those two elements have a good relationship, both flow and velocity. So let's try to, like I said, we'll try to illustrate that as best I can right here. So picture this as this big cardboard tube. It's wide open, no restrictions, free flowing. This is your upgraded exhaust system, right? No restrictions, large diameter, and we just blow through it. Blowing as hard as you can. At the end of it, you just get a little bit of hot air, but you don't really feel the force. So I'm blowing on it, but it's not even moving the papers on the bench. It's not moving any dust or anything around the bench. So although it's free flowing and wide open, you're getting a lot of flow. There's no velocity. There's no force behind it. On the other hand, you take this straw, again, free flowing. There's no restrictions other than the diameter of the pipe itself. But it's relatively small, but if you blow it, I can, from this distance, I'm already moving things around the bench. So the engine creating as much force, bringing in as much air in both situations, the same amount of air in both situations, coming to the exhaust portion of the system. There's no velocity behind the big tube. It's the pipe, although is restricted on the small pipe, it actually has quite a bit of velocity. So flow is restricted, but there's velocity there. So the ideal system is somewhere in between, right? And that's kind of the goal. Another way you can think about it is a garden hose. If you lay the garden hose out and you turn the water on, even if you turn it all the way on, it's just gonna run out the end of the hose, blah, 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 right? But if you pick up the hose and you put your thumb over the end of it, everyone's done it, the water's gonna spray a much further distance. It's gonna feel like it's coming out faster. You're moving, you've changed nothing about how much water is coming into the hose, but you've certainly affected by adding a little bit of resistance or a little bit of a restriction. By narrowing the opening in the hose, you're creating that extra bit of velocity. So similar way to look at it. And just something to note, kind of a general rule of thumb, the larger diameter exhaust systems generally allow you to create higher end horsepower numbers, because at high RPMs, you're bringing in a lot more air and you're moving a lot more air out of the system. So, you know, cars that are always in that high RPM range, drag cars and things of that nature, a large diameter exhaust system is not bad, although the low end torque might be hindered, whereas the smaller diameter systems might not allow you to get those super high horsepower numbers, but the low end torque numbers are often quite good. And the numbers that I mentioned, the dyno results that I mentioned that I pulled off of YouTube will illustrate that as well. So we can talk a little bit about that. So let's go over some of these dyno results again. I just pulled these off of videos from YouTube, and unfortunately I couldn't find a very many, or really I've only found one or two examples of the Q50 3.7 on the dyno that actually had results with it, both horsepower and torque. I just wrote them down with my chicken scratch, so just follow along, but maybe write the torque numbers down and just take note of a couple of these things, and then we'll break it down a little bit. So I want to go through each of them, and then we'll talk about them. So the first example, 2015 Infiniti Q50. Modifications, high flow cats, NVIDIA 2.5-inch catback system with Takeda cold air intakes and an Ecutech tune. On the dyno, made 319 horsepower, 259 foot-pounds of torque. So 319, 259. Next is a 2008 G37. High flow cats, cold air intake, a 2.5-inch catback system with an up rev tune, 311 horsepower, 240 foot-pounds of torque. So 311, 240. We'll go to a 2012 G37. Fast Intentions, 2.25-inch catback with 18-inch resonators, high flow cats, and a cold air intake system. 301 horsepower, 274 foot-pounds of torque. Now this car's all-wheel drive, so keep that in mind when we look at this horsepower number. It might be a little lower than the rest, but it's the only all-wheel drive car in the system too, and that's gonna pull a little bit of that horsepower away due to the loss through the drivetrain. Moving on to another G37, K&N drop-in filters, still in 2.5-inch catback system, 301 horsepower, 258 foot-pounds of torque. One more G37 with still-in intakes, Burke high-flow cats, a Soho custom Y-pipe. So Y-pipe, not quite as free-flowing as the dual exhaust or the X-pipe, but nonetheless, a Y-pipe and a custom catback system with an Ecutech tune. 330 horsepower, 274 foot-pounds of torque. There's a 274 number for the torque again. Another G37, 311 horsepower, 260 with Fast Intentions exhaust, 2.5-inch resonated high flow cats, still in intake system, 311, 260. We could go on and on and on. There's a bunch of these. What it comes down to is after 7 or 8 of these, the horsepower numbers that we found in cars in the 3.7 liter engine with 2.5-inch exhaust systems made on average 312 horsepower with 256 foot-pounds of torque. Okay, not too shabby. Now cars with either a 2.25, so 2.25-inch exhaust system or Y-pipe setup, on average 315 horsepower and 274 foot-pounds of torque, or 270 foot-pounds of torque. There's a big difference. There's a difference of almost 20 foot-pounds of torque between the two different setups. I didn't find very many, I'll admit, very many cars with a 2.25-inch exhaust setup. So I combined cars with the Y-pipe with the cars with a 2.25-inch setup. So horsepower numbers really aren't that different. 3 horsepower either way is not that big of a deal really. But the torque number is crazy. The difference between the two setups is very apparent. Again, almost 20 foot-pounds of torque difference to the advantage of the system that has a Y-pipe or a 2.25-inch system compared to those with the 2.5-inch pipes. Again, horsepower not all that different, but I think the proof is in the numbers. The proof is in the pudding, as they say, and this goes back to something I talked about in some of my early videos, and when I was trying to decide what to do with the exhaust system, the amount of air that these cars bring in, naturally aspirated, these 3.7 liter naturally aspirated engines. If we're talking about forced induction turbo and supercharged cars, it's a different ball game. It may require a larger diameter exhaust, but for these cars with your typical bolt-on modifications, the high flow cats or the test pipes and the muffler delete catback, whatever, 2.5-inch system is just not needed. It's just not moving that much air through the system. There's no need. Again, we're talking about flow and velocity. The amount of flow just really isn't there. It's not necessary to have such a wide diameter exhaust system. So that's kind of the hypothesis that I had. And now looking at some of these numbers more closely, it seems to be playing out. And now this is sending me down the path, the direction that I'm planning on going with my setup. So let's talk about that now that all this time has gone by and all this jabbering has happened. I got the high flow cats, resonated test pipes, whatever. We're setting this car up for autocross, okay? It's not a daily driver, right? We're setting it up for autocross, we'll say that. Mountain courses. So we'll have those installed. So we're getting rid of the restriction that the stock catalytic converters have. We got the Y pipe because I just don't like how the free-flowing X pipes sound. And again, I was following this hypothesis that we just need to open up a little bit of flow, but we can't lose the velocity. So I got the Y pipe, that's installed. I like it, but the issue that we have is we have a major restriction in the system the way it is. So let's look at the old one. So this is the old Y pipe with the exit portion, the exit collector just under 2.5 inches in diameter. We replaced it with a pipe with a collector at 3 inches, so a lot more flow. However, where this portion of pipe meets the rest of the catback or the mid pipe is still this diameter. So we have basically this size pipe meeting something with a 3-inch opening. So as the air flows, it's going to be hitting this lip as it tries to make its way out the back end of the car. So obviously we're going to have to remedy that. And how we're going to do that is I'm fabricating, or we'll have a portion of Y fabricated, and with a 3-inch opening, a 3-inch collector with a flange, so it can bolt up directly to this upgraded Y pipe. So the flow will be free. There won't be any restrictions, there won't be any overlaps or anything. It'll just flow smoothly through that collector portion, and then Y off into the rest of the the rest of the system and out through the tailpipes. And for the rest of the system, we're just going to do 2.25 inch exhaust. If we don't just leave that portion stock, which I think is maybe just 2 inches. I'm not totally sure. It might be 2.25. But nonetheless, I think we're going to get enough flow. We're going to eliminate all of the restrictions. So air is going to be flowing freely through the exhaust system. And the diameter is going to be enough to where we keep the velocity relatively high. And like I said at the beginning, I'm not necessarily going for these super high horsepower numbers. I'd like that low end grunt, the low end numbers helping with acceleration coming out of corners and things of that nature. So that's what we're really looking for. And based on these numbers that I read off, it doesn't really look like a 2.5 inch exhaust system is going to help me get those high horsepower numbers anyway. Not much higher. Obviously these cars are a little bit older. They're G37s. So they're a few years old, and the newer 37s made a little bit more horsepower to the wheel, I believe, from what I could see. So what are my goals? What kind of numbers do I hope to see? That's a good question. I'll tell you what I would love to see, and then I'll tell you what I'll be happy with. Okay? What I would love to see, especially based on these numbers and some of the numbers that I've seen, I would love to see 335 horsepower to the wheels and 200 and, I'm just going to throw it out there, 280 foot-pounds of torque. It might be a stretch, but if anybody can do it, the guys at Soho can do it, right? So I'll say, what did I say? 340 for horsepower. Let's say 338. 338 horsepower, 280 foot-pounds of torque. Now, what will I be happy with? Again, I'm not going for the super high horsepower numbers. Everybody likes to see them. It puts a smile on my face seeing these big numbers, but relatively big, obviously. What I would be happy with, I think, 330-ish horsepower. If I can break 330, I'd be happy with that. And for torque, 270, 275, I think is doable based on especially some of these videos that I've seen, especially coming from a car that Soho tuned, a G37, that they were able to tune 330 horsepower with 274 foot-pounds of torque. I saw them tune a Q50 with even less modifications, I think, than my car has, with and they got 336 horsepower, so I think it's doable. I think we'll get there, but that's just kind of what I'm shooting for. Hopefully, there was a little bit of useful information here for you in terms of exhaust. If you want to talk in more detail about it, you know, message me on Instagram or leave comments in the comment section below on this video. If you'd be interested in talking a little bit of tire theory, let me know below too, because that's kind of a video I've kind of thought about. This one is kind of impromptu. It's just, I've been thinking about it a lot, especially now that I have the tune scheduled. Coming home, I thought, God, there's just people that automatically upgraded 2.5-inch systems and just under the assumption that it's better. And because you can get it tuned and you can get these good numbers with the systems, we assume that those 2.5-inch setups are actually benefiting us when really they might be hindering performance of our cars. And again, every car, every platform is different, but for these 3.7 liter Infinities, I feel like a 2.5-inch exhaust system is not necessary. If you have good flow with some drop-in filters and you know, eliminate some of the restrictions, or at least minimize some of the restrictions, but keep the velocity up, I think these cars are capable of some numbers that we maybe haven't even seen before with just the right system. So we're gonna test it out. If it doesn't work out, then we might have to make some changes, but that's what we're going with right now. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you thought about the video. Again, I'm sorry it's a lot of rambling. I know a lot of numbers and a lot of you know, blowing through straws and stuff, but let me know what you thought. Let me know what your thoughts are, maybe what some of your experiences are. I'd love to hear some feedback. So like always, thank you very much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time.